Move that junk heap, old-timer. This ain't a scrapyard. The security officer's voice sliced through the brisk morning air, drawing glances from staff and guests outside the Grandview Convention Hall. He pointed sharply at the battered pickup parked near the front entrance, a sun-faded Chevy that looked like it had survived more than a few winters. The old man standing beside it didn't flinch. He simply nodded, shifted his weight, and opened the passenger side door. What happened next caught everyone off guard. Out stepped a man dressed in a full military uniform, rows of medals glinting on his chest. Not just any man, but a four-star general whose name carried weight in military history books. The quiet gasp spread faster than the autumn wind. It wasn't just the general that silenced the crowd. It was the contrast. That beat-up truck had carried greatness, and no one saw it coming. The man behind the wheel was Walter Riggs, 78, a retired mechanic and Army veteran. That Chevy had been with him for decades. It rattled down the road. The paint had peeled like old wallpaper, and the left taillight was patched with red tape, but it still moved. And for Walter, that was all that mattered. The mirror on the passenger side hung on with duct tape and hope. Faintly visible on the bumper was an old sticker. If you're free, thank a soldier. If you can read this, thank a teacher. Earlier, that morning, Walter had picked up his longtime friend, General Arthur McLean, retired but still commanding in presence. The two had served together during the Tet Offensive a lifetime ago. As Walter navigated potholes, Arthur occasionally adjusted the silver bar pins on his lapel. "You still dragging this old tank around?" Arthur asked, smirking. Walter tapped the steering wheel gently. "She gets me where I need to be, just like that busted Jeep in Da Nang," Arthur chuckled. "Some things never change." They were heading to a valor ceremony at the State Convention Center. A young Marine was being awarded the Distinguished Service Cross for extraordinary bravery. Arthur had been invited as an honored guest, one of the last living recipients of that very medal. When they arrived, the place was packed. SUVs and town cars filled the VIP section. Walter found a space by the curb, close enough that Arthur wouldn't have to strain his knees. But the moment Walter stepped out to help his friend, the security guard began shouting, loud, unnecessary. "Sir, that vehicle can't be parked there. We've got dignitaries arriving." A few nearby staffers chuckled. One leaned toward another and muttered, "Is that thing even street legal?" Laughter trickled like cold water through the group. Cameras snapped red carpet photos. No one gave the truck another glance until the passenger door opened. Arthur McLean emerged slowly but upright. At 82, his back was still straight as a blade, and his eyes scanned the crowd like a commander surveying a battlefield. The polished silver stars on his shoulders reflected the morning sun. The noise died in an instant. Mouths fell open. The same security guard who had barked moments earlier stood frozen, clipboard in hand. His face turned pale. "Sir, I didn't realize—" Arthur raised a hand, calm and steady. "Next time, son, look before you speak." Embarrassed, murmurs rippled through the crowd. People turned away, some fiddling with their phones to avoid eye contact, others quietly starting to record. The truck that moments ago seemed laughable now looked like a war monument on wheels. Walter helped Arthur steady his medals, brushing imaginary lint off the shoulders that had once shouldered the burden of thousands of soldiers. Then he handed over Arthur's cane, carved oak worn smooth by time and gifted by a group of Marines who never forgot his leadership. "You all right?" Walter asked softly. Arthur smiled. "I always am when you're with me." They walked, side by side toward the glass doors, one in polished dress blues, the other in a plaid shirt, jeans, and an old baseball cap that read Vietnam Vet. This time, the security team rushed to open the doors, their earlier smugness replaced by silent respect. Inside, the event organizer spotted them, a woman in her 60s, juggling a clipboard and a Bluetooth earpiece. "General McLean, we've been looking for you everywhere. The ceremony begins in 20 minutes. She paused, eyes drifting to the entrance. "Wait, did you come in that?" Arthur nodded with a grin that could have calmed a battlefield. "It's not about what you ride in, ma'am. It's about who brings you." Walter tried to slip away to a back row, wanting no attention, no stage. But Arthur gripped his elbow like he'd done 100 times before. "You're sitting with me. Front row." "I'm just a mechanic, not a general," Walter said. "You've earned your place in 68, Arthur replied. No room for debate. Before we continue the story, if you're new here, please consider subscribing to our channel. It really helps us keep making stories like this. Despite Arthur's insistence, Walter ended up in the back during the ceremony. He watched quietly as the young Marine accepted his medal, eyes glossy with emotion. Cameras flashed, applause rang out. And then Arthur rose from his seat and approached the podium to deliver a few words. He didn't deliver a long speech. He simply placed a hand on the medal around his own neck and said, "This ribbon came home not on my chest, but in the passenger seat of an old truck driven by the bravest man I know." Heads turned, whispers spread. Cameras slowly panned to the back rows. "Walter Riggs never got a medal," Arthur continued, "but he should have. He drove through mortar fire with no backup and no orders to pull me and 3 others from the rubble. And today, decades later, he still drives me here." Walter shifted, deeply uncomfortable. His calloused hands fumbled with the brim of his cap. The room stood still, and then, one by one, the audience stood up. Not for the general, not for the young Marine, but for the man in the back row, grease on his hands, humility in his heart. The standing ovation thundered through the hall. Walter sat frozen, unsure how to react. His eyes stayed fixed on the floor while the applause washed over him like a wave he hadn't expected and couldn't stop. The young Marine on stage, freshly decorated with the nation's highest honors, raised a sharp salute, not to the general but to Walter. The security guard who had dismissed him earlier stood silently by the wall, red-faced, no longer full of authority, just regret. Event staff blinked away tears. The woman coordinating the ceremony stood still, earpiece dangling as if forgotten, eyes misting over. Arthur didn't look at the cameras, didn't look at the crowd. His gaze stayed locked on his friend, his expression one of quiet victory. After 50 years, he'd finally gotten Walter the honor he'd always deserved. When the ceremony ended, Walter tried to disappear through the side door, but reporters had already caught wind of what had happened. One of them, a local journalist, approached cautiously with a notepad in hand. "Mr. Riggs, is it true what the general said?" Walter sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "It wasn't a big deal. I just did what I had to do." Arthur stepped in behind him, arms crossed. "Don't sell yourself short. I remember what the others did. They ran. You drove toward the fire." By the time evening rolled around, clips from the ceremony had already made it online. One video, shot from a phone near the back of the hall, showed the crowd rising in unison and Walter's stunned face. The caption read, "General Honors Man who saved his life 50 years ago, in the most unexpected way." Within hours, it spread. Across veteran forums, military pages, and social media accounts with hashtags like "Real Hero" and "No Medal Needed." Military blogs picked it up. News anchors called it a rare glimpse into true service. By morning, it had gone national. In an interview he had reluctantly agreed to do, mostly because Arthur wouldn't let him off the hook, Walter finally told the full story for the first time outside of their unit. It happened in a jungle outpost during the war. Communication. Lines had been cut, artillery fire rained down on their camp, and the bunker collapsed with 4 soldiers still inside. Walter, leg wounded and unable to contact base, hot-wired a supply cart and drove 3 miles through shelling to reach them. He used his shirt to wrap injuries, drove with one hand, and somehow got them out alive. He bled all over my truck bench. Walter chuckled during the interview, eyes distant with memory. "I'd do it again," Arthur said from the couch. Beside him, the young interviewer sat still, scribbling nothing, completely captivated. No dramatization was needed. The truth was enough. Soon after, military historians confirmed the details. Archived unit reports mentioned what survivors had long called Riggs' Run. Others who had served in the same campaign reached out with their own accounts. A retired medic wrote in to say, "I stitched up one of the men he pulled out. Never forgot the name. The VA clinic Walter visited every Thursday responded quickly. The next morning, a new sign had been mounted over his usual parking spot, right where he always left the truck. It read, "Reserved for Walter Riggs, hero in work boots." Even the same security guard from the ceremony visited him the following weekend. Gone was the smug demeanor. He held out his hand with humility. "I was wrong, sir. I'm truly sorry." Walter shook his hand firmly. "You don't owe me an apology. Just remember, most folks are carrying something you can't see." The response from across the country was overwhelming. Letters poured in. Veterans mailed in old service patches. A few even sent spare parts for Walter's pickup. One retired Navy mechanic drove across 2 states just to offer his help restoring it. Walter resisted the attention. "It's too much," he'd say, shaking his head. Arthur would smile. "It's long overdue." A week later, Walter stepped outside his modest single-story home to find something waiting in his driveway. The truck had been transformed. A marine motor pool unit had completely restored it. Engine tuned, frame reinforced, body polished. The old radio now worked again, playing the same country station it had 50 years ago. But the team had left, few dents and scratches untouched. "These are her medals," said the head mechanic. "Every dent's a memory." On the tailgate, someone had stenciled a simple phrase in military font. "You don't need stars to deserve respect." Walter ran, his fingers across the letters, his eyes moist. A few neighbors gathered to witness the moment. Some brought their kids. A local teenager took a photo and posted it online, writing, "This man lives down my street. I never knew." A few days later, Walter pulled into a gas station, and a stranger walked up, a young man in fatigues. "Sir, are you the one from the video?" he asked with awe. Walter raised an eyebrow. "I might be. My dad said you're why guys like me made it home." "Thank you." Walter nodded, unsure what to say. These weren't words he was used to hearing. He'd never looked for recognition, never even told half the stories that now floated across the internet. But each person who thanked him made something inside him shift, not ego, but peace. The next Valor ceremony arrived a year later. This time, Walter didn't sit in the shadows. He sat beside Arthur right in the front row. When the national anthem played, they stood shoulder to shoulder, one man with medals shining under the lights, the other with oil-stained hands folded over his chest, both proud, both upright, both honored. After the ceremony, a newly enlisted corporal approached, nervous but curious. "Sir," he asked, "how do you learn to be brave like that?" Walter paused for a second, then answered quietly, "You don't wait to feel brave, you just decide that someone else is worth the risk." Walter's story could have ended with the applause, the interviews, or the shiny refurbished truck, but the real legacy wasn't just in the headlines or plaques. It was in the quiet moments that followed. Every Thursday, he still drove that same route to the VA hospital, picking up Arthur along the way. Nothing about their routine changed, except now when they passed through intersections or parked near the entrance. People waved. Veterans saluted from across the lot. Occasionally, someone would roll down their car window at a red light just to say thank you for your service, and this time they said it with understanding. Not just a phrase, but a weight they now recognized. One warm afternoon, Walter was leaning against his truck outside the VA clinic, waiting for Arthur to finish up inside when a young boy approached. His dad stayed back respectfully, hand resting on the boy's shoulder like permission and protection rolled into one. The child's eyes were wide, curious, maybe a little unsure. "Excuse me, mister. Are you the guy with the truck?" Walter chuckled. "Depends. Who's asking?" The boy glanced back at his dad, then back at Walter. "My dad said you saved a general, and that makes you one too." Walter's throat tightened. His smile faded into something softer. "I just showed up when it mattered," he said quietly. "That's what we did. Still do." The boy gave him a salute, clumsy with the wrong hand but full of respect. Walter returned it without correction, honoring the effort more than the form. That simple exchange, that imperfect salute, meant more than another medal ever could. Over time, his truck became something of a town legend. People began taking photos with it, sometimes leaving challenge coins on the windshield or handwritten notes tucked under the wipers. One day, someone left a Purple Heart with a sticky note, "You earned this more than I did." Walter donated it anonymously to the local Veterans Museum. No name, no fuss. At the next Medal of Honor ceremony, exactly 1 year later, Walter didn't fade into the background. He stood proudly beside Arthur, front and center, their bond stronger than any steel ever forged in battle. And as the national anthem played, two old soldiers stood tall, one in crisp dress blues, decorated and revered, the other in a clean shirt and freshly scrubbed boots, wearing his life on his skin and in the strength of his silence. No rank separated them anymore, not in the eyes of those watching. Afterward, a journalist caught up with Walter again. "How does it feel?" she asked, "to finally be recognized after all these years?" Walter thought for a long moment, staring at the tailgate of his truck, the one with the stencil that still read, "You don't need stars to deserve respect." "Feels like someone finally saw us both," he replied. "Me and her." He wasn't just talking about the truck, and though the story eventually faded from trending pages and front headlines, as all stories do, the people who witnessed it didn't forget. Kids grew up telling their classmates they once met, the old guy with the hero truck. Veterans in other towns hung printouts of his story in their lodges. A local school added a short lesson about him during Veterans Week, not just for his actions, but for the message his life carried. Walter never asked for a legacy. He just lived one. He never boasted, never exaggerated. He just showed up. Again and again, when it mattered most, when no one else would. And in the end, his story wasn't just about heroism in war. It was about humility in peace. Even Arthur, whose medals could fill a wall, said it best during one of their Thursday drives. "You know, Walt," he murmured, staring out the window, "people think bravery is about noise, action, spotlight. But you've shown them something different. You've shown them that the quietest man in the room might be the one who ran toward the fire when everyone else ran from it." Walter didn't respond. He just tapped the gas and kept driving. The road ahead was familiar, the engine humming beneath them like always. His truck, like its driver, didn't seek glory. It simply did its job, without hesitation, without complaint. And that, more than any ceremony or citation, was the definition of honor. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to our channel and let us know your favorite moment in the comments.